Our next speaker for the day is patient advocate Kathie Potts. Kathie and her husband Adam cared for their daughter Annabelle as she lived with a very rare brain cancer. They searched the world for treatments and devoted everything they could to save her. Sadly, we lost Annabelle in 2019, and Kathie's story is one that needs to be told. She's going to be in conversation with Cockburn from Rare Cancers Australia. Please welcome them both.
Thanks, Kathie, for joining us today at the 2020 CanForum. We really appreciate you sharing your story and Annabelle's story.
Yeah.
Would you like to start by telling us a little bit about Annabelle?
Yeah. Annabelle was the absolute kindest and most caring person I've ever met. She was so selfless. She just loved helping people and doing things for other people. Even when her little brother was born, she was only 2.5, but she never got jealous, never got upset that the attention was on him. All she wanted to do was help out. And then when I was pregnant with my third Juliet, I remember Annabelle would say to me, "We are going to be so busy when the new baby comes." It was always going to be her baby as much as it was mine. She was just the best big sister. And even to the point where 2 weeks before she died, it was Christmas Eve, she was unwell, she was vomiting, she had a little feeding tube in her nose and she was having trouble speaking, she couldn't walk, and she just rolled over and looked at me and she giggled and she said, "Mummy, I'm so excited for Christmas." And I said, "Oh, what are you excited about, Annabelle?" And she said, I just can't wait to give everyone their presents." She was just the most selfless little person you've ever met.
Kathie, so you've got this gorgeous little girl, and one day things changed for your family.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So, as I said, Annabelle was always so kind, caring, sweet, well-behaved. And then about 6 months before she was diagnosed, she started just waking up through the night, and she was just waking up and wandering around through the house. And we weren't sure what was going on, so we took her to the doctor. And the doctor said she had night terrors, which we didn't believe was the case because she wasn't waking up screaming, she was waking up just wandering. And then 3 months prior to diagnosis, she started to have severe behavioural changes, which, as I said, she was always such a kind, caring, sweet little girl, and she started getting very upset and we couldn't figure out why. She was getting very angry a lot of the time. And then again, we took her back to the doctor and she was diagnosed with anxiety, which again, we didn't think that's what it was, but what else could we do? Then 2 months prior to diagnosis, she started to have slightly slurred speech and she had slight facial paralysis, particularly around her mouth. And again, we were back to the doctor. The doctor then diagnosed her with Bell's palsy. And Adam and I, putting all these pieces together, we weren't convinced. We thought something's not adding up. So we pushed a little bit further and said, "Look, can we rule out anything else?" And the doctor did say, "Well, let's just rule out brain cancer. It's not incredibly common, but let's just do a blood test to make sure." So we took Annabelle to the doctor. We got a blood test done and the blood test came back negative for brain cancer. We only found out later on that blood tests don't actually diagnose brain cancer, you need an MRI. So we were told Annabelle didn't have brain cancer. Then in the following months she started to vomit on and off. We took her to 2 different doctors at this point who said she had a tummy bug or gastro, she attends daycare, that's what it must be. And again, my husband and I, we weren't convinced, but what could we do? And then on Boxing Day, she started limping. And so we took her to a completely different doctor who we told all the pieces of the puzzle to, and she sent us straight to emergency, and Annabelle had an MRI.
So at that point, Kathie, Annabelle was diagnosed with DIPG.
Yeah.
So just for our audience, DIPG is a very rare, very aggressive, very difficult to treat brain tumour, isn't it?
Yeah.
That only affects young children.
Yeah.
And has a 100% fatal prognosis. That's right, isn't it?
It's got a life expectancy of less than 1% over 5 years.
So Annabelle's 3.5 now. Kathie.
Yeah.
What was the plan to treat Annabelle's DIPG?
There is no treatment for DIPG. There was no plan. We were told that she is going to die. We talk about this tumour in months. She was offered palliative radiation, but we were told that even with palliative radiation, we would get months if we were lucky.
Where do you find hope at a time like that, Kathie?
Yeah. We didn't find much hope back home here in Australia from our doctors. We were part of a DIPG community, online community worldwide, and that's where we found our hope. We started to hear of a few longer term survivors. We saw that there was experimental treatment, but it was all overseas. There were some clinical trials, but again, all the DIPG clinical trials were overseas.
Yeah. Is that how you ended up in Mexico?
Yeah. So we founded experimental treatment in Mexico, and they offered a combination of different drugs. So, and we were watching many children who were going over there. There were about 60 from all over the world, and a lot of the children, they were going over there in a wheelchair, and then they were going home walking, and they were playing on the monkey bars, and they were improving, and it seemed to have little to no side effects. So
that must have seemed incredibly hopeful.
yeah, it did.
What was the downside?
Yeah, so there were a few downsides. Number one, it's in Mexico, it's not in Australia. We didn't speak the language. At the time, I was pregnant with Juliet, so we had to go over to Mexico with our 1-year-old. I was pregnant, and our sick 3-year-old. And it was very, very expensive. It was around $30,000 a treatment. And also the doctors wouldn't share what they were doing. It was very experimental. They wouldn't talk to our oncologists back home. They wouldn't share what they were doing. But Annabelle's tumour was shrinking. So what other option did we have? There was still nothing at home.
You travelled back and forward to Mexico for about 12 or 14 months, didn't you?
Yeah.
That must have been really stressful.
It was hard. It was hard.
And the choices you made were often publicly
Yeah.
criticised, weren't
Yeah,
they?
yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So people thought we were incredibly naive going over to Mexico, particularly as we didn't know exactly what the doctors were doing. We weren't naive, but we were desperate. We had no other options. And like I said, the treatment was working. We weren't naive enough to just believe that the treatment was working. We had scans done at home. And after we'd been going for about 9 months, her radiation oncologist did an MRI, and he said that the tumour looks as good as it could get, and it wasn't radiation that was making it look that way.
That's extraordinary. Why did you stop treatment?
Well, it got to a point where I think the tumour may have built up a tolerance to the drugs, and we didn't think the treatment was working well enough versus the risk of getting stuck over there should something happen. So we stopped going.
And at the age of 5.5, Kathie, Annabelle died.
Yeah, we lost her.
Kathie, you said that if Annabelle died, you wouldn't go on advocating for children with DIPG.
Yeah. So when Annabelle was here, I was fighting for Annabelle. I was fighting to save Annabelle. But, and I just thought hearing the words DIPG would be too hard if we lost Annabelle. But now every time I hear that this is happening to another family, it makes me so angry. They still don't have any options. They're still looking to go overseas. They're looking for treatments overseas, trials overseas, and we need something back home.
Yeah. Kathie, who are we looking at here?
Yeah. So we're looking at Annabelle Nguyen. She's our gorgeous little friend who also had to travel to Mexico. She was doing the same treatment as us, but she actually ended up dying in Mexico away from her family and friends. We've also got gorgeous Josie Dunn. She died in December last year after a 2-year battle. Her parents actually have a medical background, but they were still left with not many options in Australia, and they had to look overseas to source an experimental drug. And we've also got beautiful Layla, and she's still fighting DIPG. Again, her parents had no options. They had to look overseas for anything they could find. And Layla's still here, and Layla is who we're fighting for. We need to help save Layla.
It's a devastating diagnosis, Kathie.
It's devastating.
We just heard Amanda talk about the pillars of the framework, and
Yeah.
pillar number 1 is about patient-centred care.
Yeah.
What do you think that could mean for Australian families?
So every single family, every person diagnosed with cancer needs to have a treatment at home in Australia. No one should have to fundraise and go overseas. There also needs to be more flexibility around these terminal cancers. We need to have a right to try. We are going to do what it takes to try and save our children, regardless of whether we get support or not. We're not going to wait 5, 10, 20 years for something to come up, and we need our oncologists and our treating team at home to help us navigate through this so we're not having to do it alone like Adam and I had to.
We hear that a lot from paediatric families, Kathie, that they need support to make those decisions. It's really, you're absolutely not alone. It's something we're very passionate about.
Yes.
Yeah. Kathie, this is our final slide.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about this beautiful portrait?
Yeah. So when I found out 3 months after Annabelle died, I found out I was pregnant with Viviana, and as silly as it sounds, one of the things I was most upset about is that I'd never have a photo of my whole family together. So this is the way we keep Annabelle in our lives. It's a photo of our whole family. William still talks about Annabelle all the time. He remembers his big sister. He was only 3 when she died, and Juliet was only 9 months old when Annabelle died, but she says she wants to cuddle her big sister. She misses her big sister, and Annabelle will always be a part of our family, and this is why we need to fix this. We need to fix this so other families don't have to go through the same thing.
Thanks for adding your story and your voice, Kathie. It's really very powerful. We appreciate that terrible experience that you've been through, but hopefully this project and adding your story to it really helps people to understand the very urgent need.
I really hope so.
Thanks so much, Kathie.
Thank you, Christine.
And thank you, Kathie, for sharing Annabelle's story. We really appreciate it and know it's not easy.